You have to understand this. So when you're being asked for something, you have to understand, are you being asked for enharmonic equivalent? Are you being asked for diatonic whole steps? And sometimes I say diatonic whole tones. I'll also say diatonic whole tones. I'll use that interchangeably. So if I say whole step or whole tone, it means the same thing, diatonic. Are you being asked for diatonic half steps? Same thing, I could ask for semitones. This is another way to say this. It means the same thing. Okay, I might say that diatonic semitone, diatonic half step, same thing. Or are you being asked for chromatic half steps? And again, I could also include semitones. I could just say diatonic semitone. So what do each of these mean? Enharmonic equivalents. Who can give me a definition of an enharmonic equivalent? Hillary.
Same note with different names.
Okay. It's the same note, different names. So basically, we could look at it that we're talking about keys on the piano, and how many names are there for each key on the piano? Man, three. Except there's three for every key, except there's one key that there's only two names. Which one is that? G sharp and A flat has only two names, but all of the other keys in the piano have three names. It's the same key, and that when we talk about enharmonic equivalents, that's what we're talking about. Diatonic whole steps. So you're being asked to write a diatonic whole step above and below. So what's a diatonic whole step? First of all, okay?
It's like whole step above and the adjacent letter of the starting note.
Right, and a whole step below and the adjacent letter. So what does the adjacent letter mean? You said it correctly, but I just want to make sure everybody knows what that means. What does that mean when you say the adjacent letter, Mike?
A crossover next to, depending on...
The exact next letter name. So if you're being asked, for example, a diatonic whole step above and below that note, what note is that? B flat. Now everybody watch this because there's some mistakes on this on your homework. We know the adjacent letter above B is C. So we know the answer has to be some kind of a C, so you can just put that in. So it's whatever that next letter name is, that's what we want. The adjacent letter below B is what? A. So it has to be some kind of a C. It has to be some kind of an A. So sometimes on the papers, folks, I was getting people writing notes here or so anywhere, but that's not the adjacent. It's got to be, the answer is going to be some kind of C and A. And then we're going to use accidentals to create the whole step. Yes, Mike?
Oh, okay, yeah, for the whole step, right?
We still have to find the whole step, but I'm just saying that you know it's going to be a C, you know it's going to be an A. So put that first, and don't change that. Use your accidentals to create the whole step.
Okay.
Because it's diatonic, right? So then we can say, how far is B to C? Then look at the natural, how far is B to C?
Half step.
It's a half step. How far is B flat to C?
Whole step.
That's a whole step, so that's already a whole step. How far is B to A? Whole step, right? How far is B flat to A? Half step. So what do we need to do to A to make it a whole step? Abby, what do we need to do to A to make it a whole step?
Make it flat.
Make it flat, right? Because it's already a half step. So we're going to put a flat there. And now we have a whole step. Good. Diatonic whole steps. What about diatonic half steps? Who can tell me what that means? Yes.
So the adjacent note name, just a half step difference.
So it's still the adjacent note name, a half step apart. So if we have, for example, B flat, we know the diatonic note above B is C. It's just going to be the next one. The diatonic note below B is A. All right, then we're looking for a half step. And then I always go back to the natural. How far is B to C, Emily?
B to C is a whole step.
B to C.
Or wait, so would be a half.
B to C is a half step, right? How far is B flat to C?
That's a half step.
Okay, so you said B to C was a half step, right? So B flat to C is
A whole step?
right? B to C is a half step, isn't it? There's no black key on the piano between B and C. So B flat to C is a whole step. So now I've got to make this a half step. What do I need to do to C to make it a half step?
Need to put a flat next to it?
Okay, so I lower that a half step, and then that will make B flat to C flat, gives me a half step. So this is a diatonic half step. And then B to A, always think of the natural note first. Forget the accidental for a minute. B to A is what, Rodrigo?
It's a whole step,
Okay, how far is B flat to A?
half step.
It's a half step, so we just leave that, right? Everybody with me on this? Yes, Mike?
So a B flat up a half step wouldn't be just natural B?
That's not the diatonic answer.
Okay.
What does diatonic mean?
What means adjacent to?
The adjacent letter name.
Okay.
So is B flat to B the adjacent letter name?
No.
It's the same letter name,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
So then you're not giving me the diatonic answer then. What kind of answer are you giving me if I said B flat to B natural?
The chromatic.
That's the chromatic, isn't it?
Okay.
So this is chromatic. So chromatic means I'm going to use the same letter name, but I'm going to create the half steps with accidentals. And then again, it just goes back. If we say this is a natural, sharp raises it a half step, double sharp raises the sharp a half step, flat lowers the natural half step, double flat lowers the flat a half step. Then we can say, okay, we start at B flat, right? We raise it a half step using the natural, B natural. Now, so what are we going to do to make the lower note here? It's going to be B double flat, isn't it? So we're just using whatever accidental depending upon where we start. Wow, this chalk isn't working very well. So let me write that one more time. So here we are. We started with B flat. We raise it, we said B natural, and then to make the lower chromatic half step, we went to B double flat. So these are chromatic half steps using the same note, but using the accidentals to create the half step. So if we started with a natural note, chromatic half step above the natural is sharp. Chromatic half step below the natural is flat. If we start with the sharp, chromatic half step above the sharp is double sharp. Chromatic half step below the sharp is natural. Okay, so those are the things we talked about. Now, everybody, it's all based on the idea of the musical alphabet, and you have to know this. It has to be an automatic. And we have to know, if we follow the musical alphabet, there are whole steps between every letter name except in two places. B and C and E and F are half steps, right? So then we can, from that point, we can figure out the rest of these things if we understand what they mean. And then we just use our accidentals to create the other notes.